At our family business meeting, my brother declared, "I'm taking over." When I revealed the truth about his shady deals, he lost everything in an instant. I thought the morning was going to be like any other. It was a typical Tuesday in mid-October, still warm enough that the leaves hadn't quite reached their full autumn splendor, but cool enough to hint at the change of season. I walked down Main Street toward the small, cozy cafe around the corner from my family's office. The cafe was a comfort I'd established years ago when I took on the role of managing partner at my dad's business, a construction company that had been in our family for 3 generations. It was almost a ritual, starting my mornings with a strong coffee, bagel, and a glance through emails. The cafe's regulars knew me. "Morning, Leo," called Mrs. O'Connor from her usual corner seat, a newspaper already spread before her. She was always there when I came in, always with that disarming smile. "Morning, Mrs. O'Connor," I replied, nodding as I slid into my seat at the counter. Just as I was about to sip my coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my brother, Garrett. The moment I saw his name, I felt a slight chill. Garrett wasn't one for early morning texts, especially ones that sounded urgent. "Garrett, meeting at the office at 9. Be there. Non-negotiable." "Great," I muttered, half under my breath. The last meeting Garrett had called was more of a lecture, where he laid out his latest vision for expanding the business into some risky areas, making more money faster, streamlining operations, as he called it. As always, I felt a pang of resentment and frustration mixed with the faintest bit of guilt. Garrett and I were close once. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was when Dad put me in charge. Garrett hated that he wasn't the chosen one, even though he'd never lifted a finger to make himself the obvious choice. I kept sipping my coffee, letting the bitterness of the roast ground me. This was the family business, and we'd both promised Dad we'd keep it alive. And I intended to keep that promise, regardless of Garrett's increasingly absurd ideas. By 8:55, I was at the office, and I knew from the buzz in the air that Garrett's meeting had more gravity than usual. Sandra, our receptionist, gave me a quick glance, something between a warning and a plea. "Good luck, Leo," she whispered as I walked past. She probably knew better than anyone how our sibling rivalry had started to infect the company. I stepped into the conference room, and there he was. Garrett sat at the head of the table, in my usual seat. The audacity. He wore an expression that was so smug I had to bite my tongue to keep from snapping at him. "Leo," he greeted me with that phony warmth that only meant one thing. He was about to pitch something outlandish, and he expected resistance. Several board members and managers were seated around him, including Claire, our CFO, who looked particularly uneasy. I nodded to her, knowing she'd likely been caught off guard just like I was. "All right, Garrett," I said, sitting down directly across from him. "What's this all about?" He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a flash of irritation straight to my core. "Leo, let's get to the point. As you know, the company's been struggling under your old-school management style," he said, making air quotes with his fingers. "And with the new direction I've been exploring, I think it's clear we need a change." "New direction?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean those contracts with the foreign suppliers you've been negotiating behind my back?" His face fell for a second, but he recovered quickly. "Oh, don't be dramatic. That's just standard business expansion. I'm thinking bigger. Look," he leaned forward, his voice lowering, "the industry is changing, and if we don't start thinking outside the box, we're going to be swallowed by the competition." I looked around the table, noticing a few nods from younger members who'd only recently joined. I hated how Garrett had this persuasive, almost hypnotic effect on people. He was charismatic, I'd give him that, but charisma without integrity was a slippery slope. "So, let's get this straight," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You want to turn the family business, Dad's business, into what? Some high-risk venture dealing with overseas suppliers who can barely keep their own lights on?" Garrett's smirk deepened. "Dad's business? Leo, come on. It's not the 1970s anymore. We're in a new era, and we need new leadership." He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a noxious gas. "I'm taking over." The room went silent. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I knew Garrett was ambitious, but I never imagined he'd outright declare he was taking over. My heart was pounding as I locked eyes with him. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back, casual and smug. "Effective immediately, I'll be running operations. I've got the backing of most of the board." He motioned to a few members around the table, some of whom had the decency to look away. "You can stick around, of course, but I'll be making the calls." I clenched my fists under the table, willing myself not to explode. "So, you've been rallying support for this. Coup without telling me?" "Coup is such an ugly word," Garrett said with a shrug. "Think of it as evolution." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done to keep the company steady, the years I'd poured into this business to honor our father's legacy, Garrett was ready to just waltz in and push me aside, treating it like his personal playground. "I'm going to give you one chance, Garrett," I said, each word laced with the fury I was barely containing. Drop this, and we'll go back to the way things were. I'm serious. But Garrett just chuckled, dismissing me with a wave. Oh, come on, Leo. This is happening. Get used to it. That was when Claire, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke up. Leo. Garrett, can I just say something? Both of us turned to her, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly caught in the middle of a power struggle she hadn't signed up for. Claire, you're CFO, I said, keeping my voice calm. Do you support this? She glanced from me to Garrett and then back, her hands fidgeting with a pen. I don't know if I'd call it support. But Garrett has raised some valid points about the need for innovation. I felt a pit opening in my stomach. And what about the risks he's taking? Garrett interrupted before Claire could respond, his voice dripping with irritation. Stop trying to scare everyone with your risks, Leo. You're acting like a paranoid old man, clutching onto Dad's outdated business model. That was it. I slammed my hands on the table, leaning forward to meet Garrett's smug gaze. I know about the shell companies, Garrett, I said, my voice low but clear. I know about the offshore accounts, the siphoning of company funds, the bogus consultants you've been paying with our family's money. The color drained from his face, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his confidence. What are you talking about? He stammered, a little too quickly. Don't play dumb, I shot back. I've been following the money, Garrett. All those flashy dinners, trips, unexplained expenses? You've been bleeding this company dry. And I have proof. The room went deadly silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, the shock and disbelief hanging heavy in the air. Garrett's smug facade crumbled, his face pale as he sputtered, This is insane, Leo. You're making things up because you can't handle change. Everyone here knows that. I leaned back, the satisfaction of his panic feeding the calm in my voice. Oh, I'm not making anything up, Garrett. I've got the receipts. I've had Claire look over the numbers, and every last one points straight back to you. Isn't that right, Claire? Claire, who had been nervously glancing between the two of us, took a deep breath and gave a small nod, avoiding Garrett's glare. It's true, she said softly. Leo brought some irregularities to my attention a few months ago, and I've been monitoring them since. Garrett, the offshore accounts, the misallocated funds, they don't lie. Garrett slammed a fist on the table, his mask slipping into full-blown anger. You're both out of your minds. You can't pin this on me without real proof. Oh, I have proof, I said, my tone cold. I've got printouts, copies of every shady transaction you signed off on, including one from last month, $50,000 wired to a company that doesn't even exist. I cross-checked it all, Garrett. It's as airtight as it gets. There was a gasp from one of the board members, a man named Ron, who had been a family friend since we were kids. He looked at Garrett with open disgust. You've been stealing from your own family's business? From your dad's legacy? Garrett's eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. But no one came to his aid. The faces around him were filled with shock, disappointment, and disgust. He looked at me, his voice dropping to a sneer. So, what's your plan, Leo? He spat. Publicly humiliate me? You think you're a hero for exposing this? No, I replied calmly. I think I'm a brother who's had enough. I tried to give you a chance to back down, Garrett, but you just couldn't help yourself. You had to try to steamroll everyone, just like you always do. He sat back, crossing his arms defiantly. Fine. You're so righteous, go ahead. Turn me in. But this is still going to blow back on the company. You're not thinking straight, Leo. This isn't just a family drama, it's corporate fraud. You'll burn this business to the ground if you go through with it. For a moment, there was silence. He thought he had me. He thought he could manipulate me into backing down to protect the company's reputation, just like he'd done so many times before. But this time, I wasn't going to let him wriggle out of it. You're right, I said slowly, leaning forward, it will reflect on the company. But I'd rather rebuild from the ashes than let you keep poisoning it from within. And don't think I haven't already thought this through. You see, Garrett, I've got a plan. Garrett's confident smirk returned, but there was a shadow of uncertainty in his eyes. Oh yeah? And what's that? I gestured to the board members. You all remember the clause in the company's founding charter, right? The one Dad put in place to protect against exactly this kind of betrayal? Claire nodded, and so did Ron. I could see the recognition dawning on their faces, and a flicker of understanding went through the room. Even Garrett looked taken aback. No, he muttered. That's a bluff. Is it? I shot back. Because I've got Dad's original charter here, and it's crystal clear, any family member caught embezzling or harming the company loses their ownership stake and role in the business. The board can vote you out effective immediately. I slid the charter across the table, watching Garrett's face go white as he skimmed it. The reality hit him like a freight train. You wouldn't dare, he whispered, his voice trembling. Oh, I would, I replied coolly. I'm calling a vote right now. Either you walk away quietly and take whatever shred of dignity you have left, or the board can vote you out and have legal grounds to file a criminal complaint. The room was so silent I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Garrett's confidence was shattered, and for the first time, he looked small. Vulnerable. It was a side of him I hadn't seen in years. He started to open his mouth, then shut it, glancing desperately around the room for support. But all he saw were hardened faces. The board members, even the ones who'd been swayed by his charm before, were staring back with cold, unforgiving expressions. There was no sympathy left for him. Ron cleared his throat. I think we've seen enough. I'm ready to cast my vote. Leo's right. Garrett, you've betrayed everything this company stands for, and everything your father built. Garrett's hands clenched into fists, and he looked at me, his face twisted in rage. You're pathetic, Leo. Hiding behind Dad's memory like some martyr. No, Garrett, I said softly. I'm doing what Dad would have wanted. You lost sight of that a long time ago. The board voted unanimously, one by one. Garrett's fate was sealed. With each vote, the last remnants of his power slipped away, leaving him stripped bare in front of everyone. When the final vote was cast, Garrett slumped in his seat, defeated. He looked up at me, hatred burning in his eyes. You'll regret this, Leo. I swear, one day you'll regret it. Maybe, I said, standing up. But I'd rather live with that than regret not stopping you. Goodbye, Garrett. And with that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the room, a mixture of relief and residual tension. Finally, Claire broke the silence, clearing her throat. Leo. What happens now? I took a deep breath, the gravity of the situation finally settling in. I'd just ousted my own brother, a man I'd once trusted, from the company. The fallout would be immense. But as I looked around at the remaining board members, their faces full of resolve, I knew we'd get through it. Now, I said, my voice steady, we rebuild. We clean up the mess Garrett left behind, and we do things the right way. Together, one by one, they nodded, determination replacing the shock and dismay that had hung in the room before. They trusted me, and I wouldn't let them down. It was the end of an era, but it was also a new beginning. One I intended to honor, no matter what it took. In the weeks that followed, I dove into the task of restoring the company's finances and repairing our reputation. Every day was a battle, but it felt right. The team rallied together, even stronger than before, knowing we were working for something worth preserving. Garrett's parting words stayed with me, his threat echoing in the back of my mind. But in the end, it didn't matter. I'd done what needed to be done. The company survived, and so did I. And as the months rolled on, with the business thriving and our family's name restored, I realized something. Regret had no hold over me. I'd made peace with my choices, and in doing so, I'd found a freedom I hadn't known in years. Garrett's betrayal might have shaken us to the core, but it also reminded me what it truly meant to protect my family's legacy. In the end, he lost everything, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd regained what mattered most.